Welcome to the third part of our introduction on Frank Lloyd Wright. We're here with Professor John Lovell, and we saw the early life and career of Frank Lloyd Wright. He went through a lot, both personally and professionally, and he was very successful in the first part of his career. So I'm wondering what happened afterwards in his long life, and how did his career evolve later?
So we're doing the biography in three parts, so that because there's 91 years, there's a lot to cover, and we ended the first part with the Wright ran off to Europe with a wife of a client, Mama Cheney, and he abandoned his incredibly successful career. I mean, the thing to do was to have a Frank Lloyd Wright house in the suburbs of Chicago. So he had an extremely successful office. But he ran off, and when they came back, they stayed on his own private estate that he built, their own little world, which he calls Taliesin. We'll see later why it's called Taliesin East. There's a Taliesin West. But she's then murdered at this place by a berserk servant, and very tragic for Wright. And he then gets married to a woman, Maud Noel, and that does not work out. The marriage is very brief, and she was mentally not well. Finally, Olga Iovana, otherwise known as Olga Vana, a Russian dancer and writer, comes to Wright and says, "You're going to marry me, I'm going to take care of you." And she runs his life for the rest of his life. So finally, he settles down with someone he loves, he can live with, and who's going to be supportive of his career. And they are married until, still married at the time of Wright's death in 1959. So those are the four major women in Wright's life. Now, there's a period from roughly 1925, 1935, about a decade, where Wright doesn't have any work. It's just, that's the way the coins fell. And part of that is the Depression it begins with the stock crash in 1929. So Wright is in his 60s. He figures that's how long you live. He figures his life is over. But maybe he'll pass on some of his ideas. And he forms he doesn't like the term school. So he forms what he calls an apprenticeship, which becomes later Taliesin Associates. And young people, instead of going to architecture school, can come and stay, work on the farm, and help Wright with his projects. And so that's what he does for some years. During this time, in the 1930s, he's doing a project in Arizona, and you get about 6 to 8 feet of snow in Spring Green, Wisconsin in the winter. And in the summer, so in the winter, he says, it's a little bit warmer here. He buys some land and builds what's called Taliesin West. And we'll look at that in some detail, but he then, for the rest of his life, a whole caravan of automobiles, and he collected automobiles, Packards and Duesenbergs. A whole caravan would go with his family and his these apprentices, between Wisconsin and Arizona. You don't want to be here in the summer. It's over 100 degrees. So he would go back and forth. And then he gets these projects, Johnson Wax and Falling Water, and they relaunch Wright to major notoriety. So 1938, cover of Time magazine, the leading news magazine. So here's Wright, and here in the background is his Falling Water. Can't do better than that. 1940, one-man show at the Museum of Modern Art featuring his work, Museum of Modern Art in New York. And 1938, Architectural Forum, one of the three leading magazines of the day. No longer with us, but a major architectural magazine. They give him the whole magazine. He designs every single page except for the ads. So not only does it feature his work, but he does all the layouts and everything. So major relaunch of his notoriety and his importance as an architect. Now, in the meantime, modern architecture has been bubbling up in Europe. And we can argue that in 1911, Wright goes to Europe. The reason why he and Cheney went to Europe was he was working with a European Dutch publisher to publish his work, and the guy's name is Wasmuth, so it's called the Wasmuth Folio. And today, you just put your work online and everybody in the world sees it. Or, you know, you get beautiful color photography, it goes in a Japanese magazine, everybody in the world sees it. But at that time, ideas didn't spread that quickly. So this work gets published in Europe, Europeans see it, they say, yeah, these clean rectilinear, geometric forms, asymmetrical, and we see begin the development of the European architects. And so in 1932, Museum of Modern Art does a major exhibit of what's called the international style. So that's how this European architecture was identified, a few American examples as well. And most typical of this work would be Le Corbusier's Villa Savoie and Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona Pavilion. So this is the catalog for the show. Henry Russell Hitchcock and Philip Johnson do the exhibit and the catalog. So now Wright's got some competition. There's, you know, he's now a figure in what has now become modern architecture. So just to get a feel for the period, 1936, we're taking as our culminating point. Here is Falling Water. This is what an automobile looked like in those days. And these are quite collectible. Wright actually had cords. This is a cord. And this is Wright's favorite color. When he got a car, he would have them painted that color, that sort of rust red. So in 1936, Wright was 69. Life expectancy in the United States was 67. So, you know, he was old. U.S. population was 125 million, which makes it roughly a third of what it is today. Chicago population, 3,400,000. That's really a peak. It's going to go down from there. Farmers are 20% of the labor force. So we're beginning to become an industrial country. A third of households have telephones. So technology is starting to percolate into people's lives. So the world, you know, keeps changing through the course of Frank Lloyd Wright's life. So our key building during this period of Wright's life is Falling Water. So here's a question for our students to think about. What place does Wright's Falling Water hold in your imagination today? Is this still an image of, for you, of what a house might look like? So we're 2/3 of the way through Wright's life, and next we'll wrap up our biographical section.
Thank you, John. This is really impressive. The life and influence that Wright has had in the States and in Europe and later all over the world. So thanks for sharing this with us.
Thank you.